Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today we're with David Baldacci. I will keep the introduction short because none is required. From the time of his 1996 debut novel, Absolute Power, David has been a megastar. He has published more than 50 novels in 45 languages in 80 countries, and the last I looked, about 150 million copies sold, although I think that is a little dated and probably a much bigger number.
Yeah, I think everybody stopped counting.
Well, in addition to his many charitable works, he and his wife, Michelle, founded the Wish You Well Foundation to promote literacy. And his latest, Strangers in Time. David, welcome.
Thank you.
To see you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So this morning, we're going to have some sparkling water.
Yes.
I actually have some ice here if you'd like some ice in the glass.
No, I'll take it.
All right, I'm going to do a little so we'll still have the sound effects without the liquor. Just won't need the nap at 2 o'clock this afternoon. But yeah, busy. It's morning time here as we record, and you have a busy day.
No, but I'm really glad to be here. It's always fun to talk about books.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with the beginning. As you know, that we do on the show, you're a Richmond guy through and through, or a Virginia guy through and through, and born in Richmond.
Yes.
Okay. And I read something that your mother gave you a notebook when you were a kid to write stories in, and that planted the seed.
Yeah, so my mom, I was the youngest of three, and I was a kid who never shut up. I told stories and told tales all the time, usually to get myself out of trouble. When I was 5, I grew up in a street called Austin Avenue in Richmond, and I argued with everybody so much that they started calling me the Austin Avenue lawyer. Ironically, I grew up to be a trial lawyer. But my mom, when I was about 8, gave me a blank page book and said, honey, I know you like to read. And I know that you have all these ideas, so why don't you start writing some of them down? That might be fun. So I did. As soon as my pencil hit the paper, it was kind of like this epiphany that I can transfer what's up here on the paper and maybe other people could enjoy it. And I never really looked back. I just started writing short stories and later on screenplays and eventually novels. And I went back to my mom years later to thank her. And she said, honey, I'm so glad it's worked out for you. But quite frankly, I just wanted to shut you the hell up. She threw out the little Southern phrase, you'd gotten on my last nerve, boy.
That's so funny.
So that's where it started.
It was just a parenting technique to sort of get some private time for mom.
A moderation of behavior. It worked.
Do you have siblings?
I do. Older brother and an older sister.
And did they not get the notebook early on, or what are they?
Well, my sister was a journalist for years, and she's actually written a couple of novels. And my brother was an artist for his career.
Oh, wow.
And so there was sort of that vein of creativity.
Were your parents big readers or into the arts?
No, but here's what they did. Neither one of them had the opportunity to go to college, but they knew the quality of an education. And so we were, the three kids were the first of our family to go into college. We all went to VCU in Richmond because it was really cheap and you can work your way through college, which we all did. But they took us to the library every week. And I grew up at the tail end of Jim Crow in Richmond. So I grew up in a totally segregated society, and books changed my life. When I didn't have an opportunity, as Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice. I didn't travel outside of Virginia until I was in my 20s, but I like to think that I traveled the world without a train ticket or a passport through books.
Through books, right.
And so I saw people who didn't look like me, think like me, pray like me, dress like me, but we share that common core of humanity. And I really think that saved me because the world I grew up in was sort of a dark world.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. For an inner city kid, that's the only way you see a pasture and a cow and a horse. It's only through books.
Right. I don't think people can realize the full spectrum of human experience without books, because you're going to meet in books far more people than you're ever going to meet in real life. And you can go to places and books you can't go to in real life, like the past and the future. And they all provide context and perspective and information. But books also teach you empathy. Because you read about people maybe in dire circumstances against a lot of obstacles that they maybe overcome or don't overcome, but it teaches you empathy, which leads to all the other really good human qualities.
Yeah. It's interesting. Of all the writers who come on the show, there's almost nothing in common except everyone's a huge reader and always has been.
Yeah. Well, books changed my life. I wouldn't be sitting here today as a published writer if I hadn't fallen into love with books at an early age. And they just put me on a really positive path in life.
Yeah. So from VCU, Virginia Commonwealth, you stay in Virginia for law school at University of Virginia. UVA Law is one of the best law schools in the country. And I know so many people who no longer practice law but will still say that the law school education is one of the best things they ever did for themselves.
I agree with that. It made me a better person all around. My publishers lament the fact that I'm a lawyer because, as they said, you read and actually understand all the contracts, and you've rewritten the contracts to favor yourself. And I said, well, you know what? Nobody should care more about their career than the writer. Nobody else. And if you don't sort of understand the industry and work in partnership with your publishers, bad things probably are going to happen at some point. But yeah, no, I love my time at UVA. It's a great school. I don't think I can get into UVA now. It's so damn competitive. But I got in back then, and it was a thrill for me.
So then you do practice law. You mentioned trial attorney, but it was real estate, or what kind of law were you practicing?
It was all civil litigation. I worked on one criminal case. It was the Clayton Lone Tree case. He was the Marine guard who was accused of treason with a Russian spy at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And the lead partner on it was a partner in my law firm and actually worked on that case. Mm-hmm. But mostly it was anybody suing anybody else, usually companies, any type. I went everything from securities to business law to transaction to insurance to real estate, whatever made people go to court, there I was.
And on the litigation side?
Oh, yeah.
So you're in the courtroom making it happen. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And enjoying it, but maybe not as much as you might if you were a writer, because I think you were moonlighting during many of those years, writing screenplays and short stories and things.
I was. When I was in UVA Law, my classmates were trying out for a law review in moot court, and I was trying to sell short stories to Playboy magazine. But I knew that I had to have a job. I couldn't make any money selling short stories, so I was going to practice law, and my hope was that if I kept writing and getting better and trying new things, I went from short stories to screenplays and eventually to novels, that one day maybe I could support myself as a writer. But you got to have a day job, right?
So where were you finding the time to do it? Was it weekends or trains? And I think I read John Grisham was writing a lot on trains on his way to the law job.
Yeah, I would write either really early in the morning, but usually I would write from like 10 at night until 2 in the morning. Mm-hmm. I would get onto my little cubby hole in the bottom of the townhouse where we lived. And it sounds draconian, but that was the happiest I was, because during the day, I had to write and work on things that other people wanted me to work on. Mm-hmm. When I went down to my little cubbyhole, that was my time. I was going to write the things I wanted to write.
Yeah. And you eventually get the idea. So you mentioned screenplays, short stories. You eventually get the idea, like maybe I'll try the novel, and you have the idea for what becomes Absolute Power.
Yeah, my law office was near the White House. So when I would take walks, I would see, I think Bush 41 was the president then, and I would pass the White House. You see the Secret Service. Sometimes you'd see the motorcade come out. And I was a student of history, and I remember JFK and all the trysts he had. So I thought, okay, what if the president, has a tryst and something really bad happens? Mm-hmm. And then I can flip all the, the stereotypes. I can make the good guys bad guys, and I can make the burglar who witnessed this happen, who's, steals from people, have the highest morals in the story, and he wanted to do the right thing. I said, I think I can make something of that. So I spent 3 years writing the novel, and that's the book that changed my life.
And you found an early believer in an agent. I can't remember the agent's name, but someone said, I think I can sell this thing for a lot of money.
Yeah, Aaron Priest. I went up, and actually I sent the manuscript up to like 7 agents, and 6 of them wrote back and said, we want to be your agent. So I went up and interviewed them, which was surreal for me, because at that point I'd just known rejection. But he said something different to me. He said, look, anybody can sell this book. But what I want to know is this the only book you have in you? Because I don't represent writers, I represent careers. Mm-hmm. And I said, I think I have a lot of books I want to write. And he just called me for Pub Day yesterday, and he said, remember when I asked you if you had any of the books in you? And he said, well, I think you've answered that with finality. So I picked him. He's still my agent today, and we've had a great run.
Yeah, I think some article I read described the conversation you had with your wife when you got the news of the final amount of the advance. And your wife's like, it's sold. And you're like, yeah. And she's like, congrats. And you're like, no, you don't understand.
Well, when I told her the book was going to be published, the first thing she said to me, that's terrific, honey. How much is it going to cost us? She thought it was going to be self-published. And I said, no, the cool thing is they're paying us.
Paying me. Yeah.
And then when I told her, I think she threw up. And again, nobody at my law firm knew I'd been writing all those years. So I couldn't tell anybody. I had to go to a meeting with like 30 other lawyers, a luncheon about updated insurance regulations. You just want to slit your wrists when you're listening to this stuff. And all I wanted to do was jump on the table and do the electric slide all the way down the table. I just needed to tell somebody. Yeah. And it was quite a day.
Did you? So you mentioned you knew you had other books in you. Did you know I was just having this conversation with someone else about defining a career. And this person was making the argument, you really need to know and sort of declare what kind of writer you want to be. Like, I'm going to write legal thrillers, or I'm going to do this or that, and kind of stay in that lane. And then that's what certainly your agent wants to hear. Like, this is an easier way to sell, as opposed to someone like maybe Michael Crichton, who sort of hopped around and did a number of different things. Yeah. Did you know early on, I want to be this kind of writer? Or, because we'll get to this, because this I felt was a bit of a departure for you.
It was.
Yeah.
I first started, my first 5 or 6 novels were all thrillers. And then I found a story I wanted to write called Wish You Well that was very different. And then I wrote a lot more thrillers. I never really thought about being in a box. I like the mystery component. I like puzzles. And I remember John Updike was once quoted as saying, somebody asked him, how come you don't write mysteries? I hope this is true. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but he said, I'm not smart enough. Because a mystery has everything other novels have. But then they have that overlay of a puzzle piece on top of it, and you have to have red herrings and clues and misdirections and all that the other novels don't necessarily have to contain. So it is a little added work. But at this point in my career, if I find a story that I want to write and spend time doing it, and it doesn't fit into the thriller or mystery or label box or whatever, it doesn't matter to me anymore. I'm just going to go for it.
Last question on Absolute Power, because I want to move on from that, but it did kind of set up a trajectory for you around the film. So the book's 96, the film is 97.
Yeah.
So quickly seized by Hollywood and Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman, who, of course, recently passed. How did that change everything for you day-to-day life? I mean, obviously you gave up the law job. Did you? What was it like when you walked in the law firm and said, guys, I'm out?
Yeah, I had gone down. I negotiated with them. I'd gone down to like 4 days a week, then 3 days a week, then 2 days a week. And finally, I talked to my partner who I joined this big firm with, Holland & Knight, not that long before I sold Absolute Power. And I said, Bill, I'm sorry. I don't think I can be a good lawyer and I can't be a good writer if I try to do both. So I think I'm going to hang it up. And I remember Bill saying, David, you stayed for 9 months after that book sold. If it had been me, I would have faxed in my resignation on day one and I would have been out of here. So
that's nice. You left well.
I left well. And again, I'm a little bit conservative when I had a family. I had one child at that point. I didn't know if Absolute Power was going to be a success at that point. And if it wasn't, they paid a lot of money for it. It didn't sell. My career was over, basically. So I was like, I'm going to work on a second book that I'm interested in writing. I'm going to keep my day job because I'm a good lawyer. I make a pretty good living doing that. But it got to the point where it was like, I sat down with my wife, because you make all these decisions together. And I said, look, honey, I think I can really make a career as a writer. But if I fall on my face, I'm an experienced lawyer. I can always get a job. So that's where we went. Well,
I know your publisher was a big believer too, because they support it in a way I almost never see anymore. Ad spots on GMA and Larry King and posters in the subway and all that.
They went all out. I'd never forgotten that either. And I have the same publisher. I mean, they've been bought by another company, but it's the same people, the same publisher. And I tell writers coming up, I said, look, you can ask a lot of your publisher, but then you have a responsibility to allow the publisher to ask a lot of you. You're partners in this. So you may not want to go out on tour or go the extra mile, but if you expect them to go the extra mile, then you should too. I don't have to tour anymore. My books are going to sell, but it's important for me to be part of that process, be part of that world. And part of that is being good partners with your publisher, because I wouldn't be here except for the work they put in, building my career.
Well, it is great that you do it for every writer, because you're drawing people into the bookstore and then they buy yours and they grab someone else's on the way as well. Just engages readers with the bookstores.
It's an ecosystem. It's one of the few things Amazon.com can't do, you know. And it's that ecosystem of writers and readers and publishers and booksellers. And if, like any ecosystem, if one part of it doesn't uphold its responsibility, the ecosystem dies.
Yeah. Speaking of not needing to really tour anymore, I know, so your Warner Books was your first, is your publisher. I remember, I think Nelson DeMille was there at the time you first came up. And Nelson was a friend for a long time with me. And I remember at dinner once, he was like, you don't really want to have Baldacci coming out on your pub day. It's tough. There's certain writers, it's like everyone should be a number one guy. And then if they're on the same week, there's room for only number one, And he was like, Baldacci's someone you kind of want to avoid on pub day.
Nelson was a great guy. I've been reading him since long before I published any novels. He had the gift of storytelling, and he was a wonderful man as well. Yeah. Sandy was a wonderful woman, and it's so sad they're both gone now. But, he had a great career.
Yeah, he was great. He was a bit of a mentor for me, and really, really love and miss him. Actually, we'll get to Strangers in Time in a bit, but it reminds me a little bit of what Nelson did with Gold Coast, because he wrote these thrillers, and then he's like talking to his agent, like, I think I have this idea for the Gold Coast. Totally. And it turns out to be one of his best and most successful books, of course. And I was thinking about that as I was reading your book here, Strangers in Time.
Gold Coast was a phenomenal read. You know, I've loved all of his books. His thrillers are top notch, his research and just his prose and the way he builds his characters. But I devoured Gold Coast. And I was like, I am living this story with these people.
Yeah.
And I actually talked to Nelson about that. And I said, you just brought you're a great writer, but you brought the magic that time at another level. And he said, you know, sometimes it just all comes together. And when it does, you just got to go for it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit about your process then, which people are always fascinated to know. And I think especially so with you. Your writing career is just under 30 years, debut in 96. You've written more than 50 books. So as you think about a normal week, and this is an abnormal week because you're running around doing events for Pub Week, but the normal writing week, how do you organize your time? Because you're clearly very busy and productive.
Yeah, if I'm in Northern Virginia, I go to my office every day, and I write there. But I'm a planes, trains, and automobiles kind of guy. I write everywhere all the time. I don't count pages or words. I just kind of write until the tank is empty. And my process is this is who I am. So I'm at my most miserable when I'm between stories because I feel like there's a vacuum in my life that I can't overcome. So I'm happiest when I have stories to work on. So it's not like on January 1st, I have to start writing a novel, and 6 months later, I'm going to have it. I turn it in, and I forget about being a writer for 6 months. When I turn a novel in, I'm already started the next novel because I don't want that gap because I feel that void and vacuum in my life. And so my process, I don't outline really much. I think about with the story, and I turn it over in my head, making sure it can justify 400-page novel. And if it does, then I'm itching to get started on the first few chapters. That gets me into a groove and a vibe about, okay, I want to be immersed in this story. And the reason I don't do outlines, I used to try to do
Did you do any outlining for this one? Because it's got a lot of moving pieces and it kind of lands in a way I was like, well, he really had this thing figured out.
Yeah, I wrote the first 200 pages of that novel in a journal my wife gave me, and I wrote it in longhand because I think better in cursive.
Yeah. Is that generally your way, write by hand as opposed to typed?
Special books like Strangers in Time and A Calamity of Souls, I wrote half of those books longhand. And I always edit in longhand just because I like to see the blood on the pages. But for me, outlining is like Tom Brady in practice. He doesn't have to be at his best. Nobody's going to hit him and hurt him. And maybe he sees the field okay, but not everything, because the stakes aren't high. You know, there are no consequences. But in a real game, Tom Brady has 11 guys on the other side who want to kill him, and that's where he sees everything on the field, and he misses nothing. His synapses are firing off, and he's in the moment. And so I like writing what I like to call immerse myself in the trenches. So when I'm writing the story, the decisions I make at that point in time count. So I can't just kick it down the road and say, I'll think of that later. No, I can't. There is no later. You're in the moment, and people are counting on you in this book, what decisions you're going to make. And I just found when I get to that level, that's why I don't have to outline a book like that, because I see everything. It's in my head. And it just makes it a lot more pleasurable for me because I'm experiencing the same journey that later when the book is published, readers will experience too.
Yeah. That's interesting. There are all different answers to that. Lee Child, who I'm sure you know well, is not an outliner at all. He's like, I'm as excited to find out what happens next as anyone else is, you know? And then there are others who are obsessive outliners. Yeah. And
there's no wrong reason. There's no wrong answer to that. If you're comfortable, whatever you're comfortable doing, do it. But keep in mind too, that as your career goes forward, you can change your process too. You know, you don't have to do the same thing over and over again. I think they call us pantsters or something, you know, there are outliners and people who just, you know, do it by the seat of their pants.
Have you ever taught fiction writing? Or
I did a master class online about five years ago, and I really prepared, you know, well for that because I didn't want it to be some fluff piece where I'm just telling stories from the road. I wanted to be practical, but I also wanted to be encouraging at the same time, and to show that at least this is my process. It doesn't have to be your process, but I may be able to help you avoid some pitfalls that I ran into along the way. And I also spent some time talking about the business of publishing and writing, and how, you know, as you build your career and you have negotiations with your publisher, how you can, you know, do things that will help you along the way, but at the same time,
I need
grow
to take that class. Where can I sign up for that?
It's the master class. It's the master class online. It's the one that everybody knows. The master class. I think it's been really popular. Over 100,000 people have taken that class. And every time I go to a book signing now, people come up to me and say, I've taken your class, I've taken your class.
Writers who were dealing with publishers and sort of negotiation tactics?
Absolutely. Both beginning writers, aspiring writers, and published writers. Particularly, I think the published writers really like my piece on the business end of publishing, which I tried to make, fair and understand that it's your career. So don't let other people manage it completely. I'm not talking about micromanaging, but you don't want to wake up 10 years from now and wonder what happened to my career.
Yeah. And the business end of it is changing all the time. Quick question. This is a little off topic of the process, but have you ever done the audio for any of your books?
No, I know my strengths and weaknesses, and that is one of my weaknesses. But I have to say, audio, talking about the business side, is one of the fastest growing facets. Yeah. So what we've done...
people would love... You got a great voice, you're a great talker, but people would probably love to hear you do it.
Yeah, well, in this book, I read the author's note at the end. They asked me to do that. But what I've tried to do with the last 4 or 5 books, instead of one reader, 2 readers, now we're doing multicast. And I don't even call them readers anymore. I call them performers. And this book has 6 readers. And I picked them all. They send audition files in. And because I have to say, I listened to the audiobook of this, and I got more out of it than I got out of actually writing or reading it, because they brought an evocation and emotion to it that I couldn't really do just simply with words. And I like the fact that if you can tie anything to a smartphone, you can get more people reading. And I don't care how they experience a book, if they listen to it, read it on an ebook, read it on a physical book, it doesn't matter to me, because once you get a book you like, you're much more likely to pick up another one.
Yeah. And I agree with you, by the way. It is an art form. They really are performers. And Scott Brick did my last book.
Yes.
And he's amazing. He brought so much extra to it that was really terrific. And now my audiobook is, I think, outselling every other platform.
Absolutely.
So do you edit as you go, or do you sprint to the finish and go back over it?
I edit as I go. So typically when I'm working the manuscript, if I'm still in the first 100 pages, when I sit down to start on it again, I'll go back and read the first few chapters again. As I get further into the book, I sort of don't go all the way back, but I'll go back and read the first several chapters that I finished writing, like previous day or two, to get myself back into the flow of it. But if something occurs to me, like you missed something here you're on page 300, what you're working on 300 will impact what you wrote on page 80. You need to go back and sort of fix that now, and then go back forward, and you can move ahead from that. But as I'm going along, I'll also take little notes here and there. Remember this, remember that. This needs to be fixed. Yeah. And when I get to the end, if I haven't totally figured out everything, but I want to get the manuscript up to the publishers to get a first read, I'll tell them, this is a pen ending. I'm just stuck a pen in it. This is not how the book's going to end. I'm still thinking about it. I've got 4 or 5 different ways it can actually, finalize. So don't really dwell too much on the ending, because it's going to change. Because not everything always comes, on a timely basis.
And then would you take feedback on that if they read it and said, hey, here's a thought about it? It's almost like sort of screen testing a film, and you can go back and rehash it. Who are your early readers that might influence what?
My wife and my editor, or my 2, Mitch Hoffman, used to work at the publisher. Then he crossed over to being an agent, and I did not want to start over after 30 books with a new editor. So I told my publisher, you just continue to employ Mitch, even though he's an agent.
Is that right? He's got one. He's a editor of one client.
He's an editor of one client.
That's awesome.
Because we have a great relationship. As you know, it's built on trust. Yeah. So I those are the 2 people to read it. And I have to say, and this is one of my masterclass too, not every word you write is set in stone. Other people have ideas and opinions and perspectives. Keep in mind, when the hair gets on the back of your neck because they didn't agree with something, everybody's goal is the same, to make the book as good as it possibly can be. So you don't have to agree with everything, but you have to listen.
When you're writing these books, how do you know when you've found... So you have a number of standalone books, a number of different series. How do you know when you've caught a character and you think, this is going to be a series?
So my very first series was The King and Maxwell, and when I finished the first novel, Split Second, I had no idea. I'd written standalones up to that point. I had no idea I was going to bring them back. But when I got to the end, I was like, that's weird. They have gas left in the tank, and I've got like 9 different story arcs that I can do for them that I thought about right now, the way I've left the book and ended it. So I started writing the second novel, The Hour Game, with them. And some characters come along that you just like, they're going to be coming back. Will Roby, or my memory man, Amos Decker. It was like, this guy has a long road to run. And you just get a feel for it as you're getting closer and closer to the end. And I also like to build in, as I like to call it, baggage. So my characters always have some albatross around their neck, some secret, some debilitation, some weakness that I can then play off of through the course of the novel and subsequent novels. So you always sort of have to hang a little bit back. My sister, who was a journalist, used to tell me, The toughest thing I had, the transition I had when I was writing fiction, was as a journalist, you're trained to get everything out immediately. Let everybody know the news. Here it is. And with fiction, it's tap on, tap off, tap on, tap off.
Yeah.
You just want to tease a little bit and pull back and then keep going.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you got to the news. You got to sort of, you don't bury the lead. You got to get that up there. But here, you got to develop some stuff. By the way, one thing I loved about this book. Well, let's move into Strangers in Time here, which I'll hold up one more time so people can see the cover of the advanced copy at least. You do a lot of development and building of suspense. So many thrillers. And this is thrilling, but I would say not a down the middle of the fairway thriller, really. Right. But it's like over twisted. Every scene. If everything's a twist, nothing is. It's sort of crazy. And then, of course, you can't even land the plot anywhere close to something that makes sense. But this was really well done, really well nuanced, and sort of, it has vibes of, for the audience, I don't always do this, because sometimes I kind of find it annoying people do this, but I will do it here because I thought it had vibes of Larson's Splendid in the Vial, of course, which was terrific. A little bit of Tony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See. Yes. Were two books, along with the Gold Coast, for separate reasons that were coming to mind. That was more about you kind of jumping lanes in a way.
Well, those are two great books to compare it to. Thank you.
And books that I loved and really enjoyed this. But can you talk about how you made it sort of into more on the Gold Coast theme of things, like why you moved into something slightly different from a down the middle of the fairway thriller? Well,
I've been an Anglophile for a long time. I've traveled to the UK many, many times. I went to Australia and New Zealand recently, and I just love that world and that culture. And it's a history buff. I read lots of things about World War II, but I was like, okay, 10 million books have been written about World War II. What can I possibly bring to the table that's original? And I remember my dad was in World War II. He was in the Navy, and he would be on destroyers going across the North Atlantic, shepherding cargo ships over for the war effort over there. As an 18-year-old, he said in his watch at night, he would be chained to the deck because the water otherwise would wash him over, and he would be chained to the deck. And he goes, I would spend 4 hours on the bow, and I would go down 30 feet, and you'd have 30-foot tall water on both sides, and the bow would go up. I'd be 30 feet above the North Atlantic. And he would get to England, and he went throughout England when he was over there. And he told me about a lot of that before he passed away. And I read a lot about it. And then I thought, okay, if I want to do a World War II book, it can't just be about the war. It's got to be about the impact it has on people. And not just on people, because books have been written about that too, but on the three characters I came up with. Sometimes you don't understand how socioeconomic circumstances can dictate how well or how not so well you can, exist in a wartime. So I took three characters. I took Charlie from A Hardscrabble Life in the East End, who had very little, Molly from the West End, and Chelsea, who had a lot, and then this bookseller, Ignatius, sort of in the middle in the Strand in Covent Garden. They all had mysteries in their background. They all had secrets they would rather not share. And then during the course of the novel, Charlie lost what little he had. Molly lost everything. And the three of them had to come together. And I guess if I want to say a theme in this, that we have been through bad times before in history, and a lot of adversity when nobody thought that we were going to make it through the other end. But it's always better to go through those times with a friend, with someone who has your back, who cares about you, who you can rely on. It's hard, no person is an island, no country is an island. We all need friends and allies. But coming together makes it a little bit easier to get through those bad times. And I think true friendship is measured during the bad times. It's easy to be a friend when times are great. Yeah. So I thought if I sort of build the story around that, set you in the atmosphere of London, which I tried really hard to do, so you felt like you were in that war zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a lot of little details.
There was a lot
to create that atmospheric.
There was a lot of research. I would go online and I would find caches of letters that Brits had written during the course of the war, from rural, suburban, and in the city about their experiences, and that was like a gold mine for me to just understand what they were going through, how they viewed it, and people talk about the stiff upper lip, but I was amazed at how they just took the most appalling conditions and just turned it into something just to get through. Yeah. And every day, today was a good day, tomorrow might not be such a good day, but we're going to get through it. Yeah.
For years, in 41, Churchill's sort of walking through the rubble and saying, hey, we're going to come together, and manages to rally them in a way that of course, Hitler and the Germans did not expect.
Yes. Thank God for that.
So with Charlie and Molly and Ignatius, any sparks there of gas left in the tank?
Yeah, it's people have asked me about that, and they've all, like Calamity of Souls, people want me to write a sequel to that with Desiree and Jack, and When they say that, I tell them a story about Chinatown. So Chinatown, I think, was probably the best screenplay ever written, and it was a marvelous movie. And then it won all sorts of awards. And then Jack Nicholson, 20 years later, said, "I'm going to do a sequel," and he called it The Two Jakes, and it was one of the worst movies ever made. And he even admitted that. He was like, "I don't know what I was smoking, but I don't know why I did it." And it was so bad that it almost tainted Chinatown. So I'm like, do I want to do that where I've written what I think are really good books and bring it back and screw it up? But with that said, a year from now, I may be writing, a sequel to it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what is next for you? I know you have a number of discussions with Amazon, Netflix,
there's
NBC Universal on book-to-film type projects, anything like that?
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. The Memory Man, the first script is done. On the 620 Man at Netflix, the second script is done. I think they're going to start casting from that. Mm-hmm. The guy who wrote the John Wick movie series is actually going to be the show and writer for the Camel Club series on NBC Universal. So when we met, he said, "I've been reading you forever," and I was like, "Well, my son thinks you're a god because he loves the John Wick series, and as do I." So that was a lot of fun. And I'm sold the Will Roby series. He's my assassin to a director who's going to, I think, take it to Apple. And it looks like I'm about to sell another reboot of the King of Maxwell series.
Oh, that's great. Nice.
As well to another streaming platform. So, I've got a lot of content. They need content. But for me, I again, from a lawyer point of view, people ask, how much control do you want? I said, all I want. I'm an executive producer. I get notes on script. I get notes on casting. If they want me to look at some dailies, I'll look at that. I'll go to the film set to watch it. And they said, "Why don't you want total control?" And I said, "Here's why I don't want total control. Because if I have total control over everything and it fails, then so much that they can blame or sue me, they will." And I don't want to be in a lawsuit with Warner Brothers for the next 10 years. Yeah. So I will just have input, and that's it.
Yeah, write the books. It's funny. You and Lee Child, I think, both debuted in '96.
Yeah, that's yeah.
It was Killing Floor, which was made into a show as well. And then I remember talking to him once, and he was saying, he famously sort of cranked out a Reacher every September. And he was saying, people think I just go into a back room somewhere and start turning a wheel and out comes a book. It's really hard. And as you know, a few years back, he sort of bounced past over to his brother, who's also a terrific writer, and they kind of
Andrew, yes,
do it. So, but it is hard. You show no signs of slowing down or wanting to slow down in any way. We don't have to worry about you doing the Lee Child move, do we?
No, I mean, it's not a job or a hobby or even a passion. It's like how I identify.
It's like breathing. Yeah,
it is,
yeah.
And I can't turn it off. When I was in Australia, New Zealand, I was working on 2 books simultaneously, which I've never really done before. But one is set in 1958 as part of my Aloysius Archer Gumshoe series, and the other one is a contemporary thriller. And I spent 2 weeks on one and 2 weeks on the other, back and forth, and it was really productive when I was down there. But I try to tell people, writing is hard. And I hate it when people say, you keep cranking out books. And I'm like, you know what? You crank an engine. You don't crank a book. You write a book. Mm-hmm. And it is hard. And I agree with Lee on that. But don't forget that please have fun while you're doing it. Mm-hmm. And I've had some of my writer friends call up and they're stressed out. Their deadline's coming up. The words aren't coming and they're ticked off. And I'm like, stop. Take a breath. And just remind yourself that we get paid a lot of money to make stuff up.
To live a dream, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I said, we have it over 99% of the people out there who go to a job just for a paycheck. So think about that, and the anxiety will probably go away. But if you're having fun while you're writing a story, trust me, it comes through in the pages.
Mm-hmm. There are so many people out there who write just for the fun of it. And there are really some talented writers who've never been published. It's very hard to break through, especially now. And in the days... so now, people are dying for your next one. But there was a time when you were an unknown person,
yes.
Writing things that ended up in the bottom drawer. There are tons of great manuscripts out there that we'll never see. Would you ever go back to your pre-'96 filing cabinet and pull something out? Have you ever done that to look at something that might... Because I'm sure you're obviously a talented writer.
Yes.
And were talented prior to Absolute Power. Is there anything from that sort of archive that might see the light of day?
I would, I've gone back occasionally, looked at some of that stuff. I would say that I've gotten better over time, which hopefully you do as you keep working on it. But it's a craft, and you build through it. And the earlier stuff was, we all have to go through that. Mm-hmm. And to get to the other end where we're actually turning out things that are professionally done and people would actually want to read. And some of the stuff I wrote before I thought was good. Is it good enough? Probably not. Some of the stuff that I wrote is crap, because sometimes you have to write crap to get to the other end of that, because you have to sort of get that out of your system and have a feel for what actually works in telling a story. I probably won't go back. I have a lot of ideas going forward, enough to keep me content for the most part. But and I lament the fact that it's really hard for writers to break into into publishing now. You have other opportunities with self-publish. It's not selling books out of your car trunk anymore. You have other platforms.
Like Vince Flynn.
Like Vince Flynn, yeah. And I even in Grisham did as well with this first one. But I tell people, I know it's hard and it's frustrating. I was with you, rejection after rejection. I remember when I got rejected for a screenplay that I'd written that everybody was hyped on and they thought it was hot. It was Die Hard in the White House 15 years before they made those movies about the White House. And I was in Islip, New York, working on a trial, and I got the message from my agent that she said everything looked great, and then Warner's passed on it, and because it's the herd mentality, everybody thought something was wrong with the script. Everybody passed. I'm sorry it didn't happen. And I remember staring out the window of my hotel in Islip at midnight, thinking maybe I'm just not going to get that break. I've written all this stuff. I've been writing for years and years and years, and never had really sold anything. Mm-hmm. But then I went back home, and I walked past the White House, and I looked over there, and I said, "What if?" And then I spent 3 years writing Absolute Power, and my life changed. I could have gone back and not said what if, and just been a lawyer and made a good living. But I just couldn't do that. I can't not write.
It takes a lot of fortitude to do the strong constitution to take that amount of rejection and then pour yourself into a 3-year project just on the come only. It's amazing.
Yes, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. On the self-published front, the only downside of that is there are about 1 million titles coming out a year. And that's not even hyperbolic. I think it actually is about 1 million. And therefore, there are no available free titles. It's like, I remember looking at some books, I'm like, maybe we'll do this. And I look, I'm like, Jesus, a book in that exact name came out like 4 months ago. So you just have to replicate, you have to repeat titles, I think.
You do.
Yeah.
It's, and thankfully you can't copyright a title. And I know books I've had titles that have been on other books as well. But, that's the way it goes.
That's how it goes, yeah. Last question before the lightning round, because I've seen you talk about this before, and it's important sort of to the mission of this show. I've seen you talk about the ecosystem of literature composed of really sort of 3 main players of writers, publishers, and bookstores. Could you just spend a moment on your thoughts about the ecosystem?
Yeah, so last night I was in Westport, Connecticut for an event at the library there, and they had a really good crowd, and I talked about the importance of libraries and reading and writing. It's not just about enjoying the next bestseller on the beach. It's actually about being a full participant in a democracy where you read and you have this wide spectrum of human experience. You understand how other people live, and you can make good decisions when you go to the voting booth. It's about becoming a complete person. And when I first started out, most of the events that I went to were sponsored by libraries or the Friends of the Library, supported by independent bookstores. And they really supported me early on and helped build my career. And there's an ecosystem there, and it's a very fragile one, because the book business has changed a lot, and people have a million other things they can do with their time, opposed to reading books. It's the best thing they can do with their time, but that's just not the way the world works. So at this point, as a best-selling writer, I don't really need to have to tour every time, but I want to, because I want to support that system. I want to go in and have an independent bookstore be able to sell 300 books in one night, because that may make their year. Yeah. And then I tell other writers, that was a great shop. You need to go there on your next book tour. And that cycle continues, because if those places start to go down, then we all go down.
Yeah. And it's a very supportive kind of thing, because whenever I see another writer do great, David Grann comes out with A Wager and it catches fire. People read that and then they go back to the bookstore and say, that was amazing. They had a great experience with a book. And they go back and say, give me another one like this,
right?
And so it's just a very nice. It is a rising tide kind of.
It is.
Situation.
That's exactly how it works. There's no better than word of mouth from readers, and then you make a person who might have read one book every 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden they're reading a book a year, 2 books a year, 10 books a year.
Yeah. All right. Well, on to the lightning round with David Baldacci. Your favorite book as a kid?
I loved Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators, which was, everybody else read the Hardy Boys, but Jupiter Jones, Pete Crenshaw, and Bob Andrews. Man, that was my parents always got me a book for Christmas and one for my birthday. Mm-hmm. I devoured them. And years ago, I went online, and there's a Three Investigator website, and I bought every first edition, because when I was a little boy, you read them and you just trash them. So I have every first edition of the Three Investigators, because really that's what got me into wanting to read consistently.
Yeah.
And those were mysteries and detectives and all that stuff.
I was a Hardy Boys guy myself, so I'll have to check that out.
Check out the Three Investigators. Yeah.
But speaking of that, by the way, this is a first edition of Absolute Power, which I'm going to ask you to sign. Look at the
I know, my God.
handsome young man there.
Yes. What happened to him?
Book or books you're reading now?
So I have two advanced readers that I'm reading, friends of mine, Anne Cleve, The Killing Stones. She writes the Vera series and the Shetland series, and she's a wonderful writer. And Lisa Scottolini is also a great writer and a good friend of mine. The Unraveling of Julia, which will be coming out in July of this year. Anne's book comes out in October. And then I was reading Say Nothing by Patrick Reef, which is about the Troubles in Ireland. My wife read it about a year ago and kept recommending it to me, and finally I'm reading it, and it's phenomenal.
Terrific, yeah.
Yeah.
Lisa Scottolini, we're trying to get her on the show this spring. I think
she's awesome. She's great.
on.
Former lawyer as well.
Yeah, so. That's right. So many, really. Scott Turow was on, former lawyer.
Scott's great.
Least attended book event ever?
Dallas-Fort Worth Walmart. Which I never understood. It was my first novel, and I went there. It was the biggest store I'd ever seen. It was not a superstore. It was a galactic store. I mean, I've never seen a bigger store in my life. It was like, this has its own zip code. So I went in, and they had this enormous table with the American flags on it because of Absolute Power, and all this other stuff around it, and stacks of my books. And I just sat there, and I just sat there, and nobody was there. And I'm just sitting there, and employees are coming by looking at me like very pitifully. I'm really sorry that you're so unpopular. And finally, here comes a woman with a shopping cart, and she's got like 3 kids dangling off of it, and she's coming right for me. I was like, I picked the book up, and then she kind of stops, and I said, would you like it signed? She goes, no, I'm looking for the diapers. Do you know where the diapers are here? And I did, because all my free time, I'd walk around the store.
I could tell you exactly where the diapers are.
So I said, come on, I'll show you. I took her to the diaper, and there you go. And, she didn't buy a book, but that was my worst. But when I was...
Did they post the wrong date or address or
no,
something?
No, it's just people that, I don't know, people that didn't, David who?
Yeah,
but
that's funny.
I went to another book signing like 4 or 5 years later in L.A., and L.A. is notorious, like, I'm too cool to go to a book signing. So I went in there, and I had like 6 people who came in, and I signed the books for them. And then the bookstore owner came over and said, let me just tell you, I know you're probably feeling discouraged, but Michael Crichton was in here signing, and he had 5 people. I was like, how is that possible? She said, it's just L.A.
Wow.
People are too cool to stand in line for book signing.
I'm assuming that bookstore has since closed. There's no way that's still around. If you're there and they've got 5 people, that is not a thriving business. My gosh. Best place to visit in Virginia?
SML, which is Smith Mountain Lake. We have a summer home there, and I was just in New Zealand, and Smith Mountain Lake reminds me of New Zealand because the Blue Ridge Mountains rise right up out of this lake. The lake is 40 miles long, has 500 miles of shoreline. It's really hard to get to, which is great because it's not overrun like Lake Anna and some other places in Virginia. I've written a lot of stuff down there. I taught my kids to sail and to boat and to ski and to wakeboard and all that down there. It's the place where I'm the most calm, but it's Virginia because you get the water, you get the mountains, you get the rural areas, you just get the heart and spirit of Virginia. I know people expected me to say like, oh, Mount Vernon and Monticello, but no, that place is a jewel. Are
you more productive there, or is it almost inverse? It's so beautiful, it's distracting, and you're less productive there? No, I am productive there. In fact, I plot a lot. I go out at like 6:30 in the morning on my paddleboard, and if there's a lot of clouds in the sky, it reflects on the water. So when you look down, it looks like you're on the top of the world. Gosh. You're on top of the sky with the clouds beneath you. And I have plotted so many books in my head when I've been paddleboarding over there that it's just beyond belief. But I'm super energized there, and I've gotten a lot of stuff done there. Oh, it sounds idyllic. Wow. Favorite few recent TV shows to recommend to the audience? The Gentleman, which is Netflix, and it deals with a guy who it was a scion of an ancient English family, huge estate and all that, and his father dies, and he's the second son. He doesn't think he's going to inherit. The first son is a complete idiot, so the father left everything to him, and he comes to find out that there are other people on that farm running a business that provides a lot of money to them, but is not exactly legal. So I love that. And then a couple other ones that I just fell upon, Ludwig, which is this British mystery. This guy who's a puzzle master, his twin brother is a detective. And I know that one. Where do you find, is that? That's on Amazon, Bookbox.
And the detective goes missing, and his wife comes to her brother-in-law and says, I want you to impersonate him and figure out what happened to him. And this guy's like afraid to leave his house. So he does. And he goes there just trying to find information. It's the first day he's at the police station, he's called in on a murder. So he has to go and look at a dead body and almost loses his cookies because he's not used to looking at dead bodies. But he uses his puzzle mind to figure out crime. At the same time, he's still trying to figure out where his brother went. And two other ones that I loved, The Residence, which is Shonda Rhimes' latest, is about murder in the White House, which was just, and it stars the actors from Orange is the New Black, and she's phenomenal in the role. And then, because we were in New Zealand, it's called A Remarkable Place to Die. It's also on Netflix, about a woman who's a detective in Sydney, goes back home to Queenstown. It's called Remarkable because the mountains around Queenstown are called the Remarkable Mountains. And it's incredibly well done. And my wife and I were watching and we're like, there's our hotel, there's the boat we were in, there's the restaurant we ate at.
Do that, yeah.
So those are just 4 terrific shows.
All right, I'll have to check all of the gentleman I think I saw. I can't remember if it was Guy Ritchie or just sort of felt like Guy Ritchie, but was it Guy Ritchie?
He was the director, yes.
That was a good one. Let's see. Most underrated thriller writer.
So I'll give you 2 because I like them both. And they're underrated. They're rated very highly by their peers. They're underrated in that I think more people should read them. Michael Korda and John Hart. And
I've read neither, so thank you for raising those names.
Both phenomenal writers. I know them both. And anything you pick up written by them is well worth reading.
Okay, great. And last question for David Baldacci, one piece of advice for the audience.
You know, we live in anxious times. It seems like all times are anxious now, but just from my experience with friends and family, I would say every time you have a negative thought, stop and come up with 2 positive thoughts to counteract it. And I think it'll make your days, your weeks, your months, and years better. We tend to brood on what's bad about our lives and think about that. And sometimes it can drive you into places you don't really need to go. And it makes you not understand that you have some positive things happening. So every negative thought followed up with 2 positive ones.
Oh, that's a great method. Well, thank you. This was terrific. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you. This is a great show. It's just fun to go out and talk to people who love books and writing, who are writers themselves, and it's just a great venue. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.